freak on. Yeah. Are you ready? Hip him up.
Hello and welcome. Here with us today is composer Lyle Workman, who has worked on various projects such as The 40-Year-Old Virgin, Get Into the Greek, American Reunion, and Superbad. Welcome, Lyle. It's good to have you here.
It's good to be here.
So, how did you end up composing for Superbad?
Well, what led me to Superbad was a film prior to that, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, which is the first film that I did with Judd Apatow.
When you started working with Judd, did you think 40-Year-Old Virgin would succeed?
When I first started working with Judd on The 40-Year-Old Virgin, I don't think anybody had any idea how well it was going to do. It was just work, you know? And like most things are, you just work and you never know how it's going to hit. I feel so fortunate to have the chance and that opportunity, you know, working on Superbad. It's just great to see Judd do so well, and he comes up with all these great ideas and formulas that make relatively inexpensive films, and it's just so amazing to be a part of it.
How did you start composing, and when did this happen?
I started, you know, as a guitarist and playing in bands. I grew up in the Bay Area, Northern California Bay Area, and I was in this group called Bourgeois Tog, and that was my first foray into the business of music. And after the group expanded, I started working with Todd Rundgren, and I did some records with him. I did some work with Frank Black, Jellyfish, Shakira. Some of the people that I've toured with are Beck and Sting, and eventually just one thing led to another, and I started working in film.
So what was the process in deciding to have such a funky soundtrack to accompany Superbad?
When I had my first meeting with Greg Mottola, who's the director of Superbad, and Jonathan Karp, who's the music editor and supervisor, it was just us three. And I saw some footage, and the music that had all been temped in was all late 60s, early 70s funk and rhythm and blues, and we really felt that it was working against these two white high school kids going off to different colleges, you know, and it was just that juxtaposition, that contrast of this super funky music and these super white kids, and they just seemed to work on a myriad of levels.
For sure. So deciding to go with such a soundtrack, how did you go about the recording process, and how long did it take you to complete the recording?
Well, it was kind of a no-brainer. Like, well, how do we make this the most authentic music as possible? Well, what if we got the original guys, you know, the guys that were responsible for making this music in the first place? So we had Bootsy Collins on bass, Bernie Worrell from Parliament on keyboard, and we had drummers Jabo Starks and Clyde Stubblefield, who those two played on all the hits, all the James Brown hits. And we also had Catfish Collins, Bootsy's brother, who played on all the James Brown band records, and he was a core man. Knowing that I was going to be writing music for that group, I mocked up all this stuff here in the studio and I demoed it out. And it just made all this music simply played on my demos when it came time to recut and just make the final version. And we did that all at Capitol Records in 4 days, and we just blasted out a whole bunch of tunes.
Was the recording of Superbad soundtrack similar to your other jobs composing and recording?
Well, I knew that the whole process of working with these players was probably going to be different from the usual scenario, in that normally with session players, myself included, you go in and you do a project, you've got music written out, and you're playing to a click track for decades, and this was actually not the case.
How was this session different?
I found that I had to almost assume, dare say, a James Brownian kind of role, using hand signals, talking them through. Every cue was, we're gonna switch now, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it was simply just looking at a piece of paper with all the directions. It was literally directing in real time as I was playing along with the band. The fact that we weren't doing a click track and I had to make sure that everything was lining up, and it was amazing because everything was all there. We gave this music its legitimacy because we were recording in the studio as a band, not just recording another film score.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for coming in, Lyle.
Thank you for having me.
Cut.
It's sad because I don't want there to be bloopers, but I keep making more.
That's gonna be the intro to the bloopers. Okay.
Or the ending or something.
I keep making more.
Wait, no, there's a pause.
Yeah.
You seen us?
I was in this group called Bourgeois Trois, and that was my first foray. Meat.
I just want to start over.